Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back into the fog and candlelight of Victorian London, and we're going to spend some quality time with the women of that age. Not the queens or the duchesses in paintings, but the ordinary ones, though to be fair, even queens weren't exactly shining examples of cleanliness by today's standards. You imagine a world without hot showers on demand, without shelves of shampoos, without even a decent stick of deodorant. Yes, tonight is about hygiene, or more often, the lack of it. And let me warn you, if you were suddenly dropped into this century without your body wash and toothpaste, you probably wouldn't last a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It always makes me smile to know someone in Berlin is dozing off at midnight, while someone in Seattle is yawning through their evening commute. Nothing makes me happier than hearing that my little whispers actually knocked you out cold. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk down a narrow London street. The cobblestones, slick with yesterday's rain, and something less pleasant that you don't want to think too hard about. The air clings to you, heavy with coal smoke and the faint odor of horse manure. And then, yes, the perfume of humanity. Because Victorian hygiene secrets weren't so much secrets as unavoidable encounters. You pass a woman in a bonnet, her cheeks powdered white, her dress neatly pressed, but your nose insists she hasn't been near hot water in days. It's not her fault bathing was a luxury, not a habit. Instead of lathering up with soap each morning, women relied on tricks. Linen shifts the underlayers were meant to absorb sweat. The idea was simple. You change the fabric, not the body. Imagine tossing your sweaty gym t-shirt in the wash every day, but never showering yourself. That was essentially the plan. You could scrub your hands, splash your face, but a full body bath, maybe once a month if you were rich, maybe once a season if you weren't. A little like scheduling a dental cleaning, but for your entire skin. And when it came to masking the inevitable smell, powders and perfumes were the great cover-up. You can almost feel the chalky dust settling on your skin as you watch women pat their faces, sprinkle their wigs, even dust their dresses. The powder wasn't just about beauty, was about pretending nothing unpleasant lingered beneath. Think of it as the Victorian version of spraying half a bottle of body mist after skipping your shower for a week. Spoiler alert, it didn't fool anyone. Some of the strangest habits were whispered among women as if they were wisdom. For example, vinegar washes, yes, dabbing vinegar on the skin to keep it fresh. To us, that sounds like preparing yourself for a salad. But in the minds of Victorians, the sharp scent meant cleanliness. You wrinkle your nose just imagining the sting, and yet, in a world without antibacterial soap, vinegar felt like a miracle. Here's where things get messy. Women often used communal bathhouses when they could afford them, but these were far from sparkling spas. The water might be reused by several bathers, one after another. Imagine stepping into a tub after your neighbor, then her cousin, then her children. By the time it was your turn, the water was less refreshing cleanse and more people's soup. But still, it was considered better than nothing. Historians still debate whether these public baths were more about genuine hygiene or just a place to socialize and gossip. Maybe both. And let's not forget the obsession with covering smells rather than removing them. Strong perfumes, musk oils, and sachets of herbs stuffed into corsets were popular tricks. You picture yourself sliding a little lavender pouch into your bra, hoping no one notices that you skipped your bath again. A sweet scent drifting above the not-so-sweet reality. Some women went even further, experimenting with bizarre remedies. There are scattered notes about using arsenic soappius, actual poison in the hopes of whitening the skin, because apparently smelling bad was forgivable, but pale smooth skin was non-negotiable. Imagine the trade-off. Glowing complexion now, potential organ failure later. A very Victorian bargain. You pause, noticing the rhythm of life around you. Street vendors shouting, horses clattering, children darting through puddles. And among it all, women walking carefully, skirts lifted from the muck, faces powdered, bodies layered with linen. They look proper, elegant even. But you now know the secret. Elegance was a costume carefully constructed over the raw truth of human odor and rare baths. It's almost funny, isn't it? You think of modern ads promising 40-80-hour protection from deodorant. Victorians would have killed for just 4 hours of freshness. Yet, somehow, they managed and even thrived. Building an empire while smelling, let's be honest, a bit questionable as the night deepens in your imagination. The picture sharpens, a parlor room glowing with lamplight, a group of women whispering as they adjust their corsets. You hear the rustle of fabric, the faint creak of stays tightening, the subtle waft of lavender satin. No one speaks of bathing schedules. It's not considered polite. Instead, they exchange recipes for powders, advice on hair oils, the occasional rumor about a new miracle soap that probably burns worse than it cleans. And you sit there, watching, part of their circle, amused and a little horrified, but also oddly comforted, because even in their strangeness, they remind you of now. The little tricks, the shortcuts, the way we all fake freshness sometimes. Maybe you've sprayed dry shampoo 3 days in a row. Maybe you've drowned yourself in cologne before meeting friends. Different century, same survival game. The fire in the hearth pops softly. Shadows sway across the wallpaper, and you let yourself sink deeper into this world where secrets of hygiene are not whispered because they're private, but because they're embarrassing. A gentle, absurd truth shared across time. The room still glows with that flickering lamplight, the murmur of women's laughter fading into the hum of the street outside. And as you lean back, trying to imagine the powder and perfumes settling in the air, you realize something else now. One here has spoken of an actual bath, because bathing in this world is not a routine, not a soothing nightly ritual with scented candles and Spotify playlists, but a rare occasion, almost an event. You picture yourself craving a shower after a sweaty day at work, imagining the water steaming, the shampoo lathering, the sweet relief. Now take that image, crumple it up, and throw it straight into the coal fire. For Victorians, that daily ritual of hot water wasn't even on the menu. Most people didn't own private bathrooms, not even the wealthy ones we picture in period dramas. Indoor plumbing was still patchy, baths were clumsy contraptions, and heating water meant hauling buckets from the kitchen stove. You wouldn't be hopping in and out for a quick rinse, you'd be planning a whole operation, like launching a rocket but with more soap and fewer scientists. The truth is, many Victorians bathed maybe once a week if they were lucky, and the poorer families stretched that to once a month, or even just a couple of times a year. You almost choke at the thought. Can you imagine a January shower and then looking forward to the April bath as the highlight of your hygiene calendar? You'd probably mark it on the wall like a birthday. And no, this wasn't about laziness. It was the reality of time, money, and sheer inconvenience. Instead of scrubbing themselves, they swapped shirts and undergarments more often. The linen shift was their shield against dirt, and changing it was supposed to equal cleanliness. The logic went, if the fabric looks fresh, you must be fresh. It's the historical equivalent of spraying Febreze on your couch and declaring the whole apartment clean. You feel the fabric against your skin, scratchy yet soft, layers upon layers designed less for comfort and more for keeping the bodies. Natural funk at bay. When actual bathing did happen, it was rarely glamorous. Imagine a metal tub dragged into the middle of a cold room. Someone boils pot after pot of water on the stove, pours it in, and by the time you step inside, the water's already cooling. If you were part of a big family, everyone took turns. Yes, same tub, same water. You can almost hear the order. First father, then mother, then the children, oldest to youngest. With the baby getting what's left, a sad, lukewarm broth flavored with everyone's day. You grimace, but to them it was practical, a way to conserve water and fuel. For the wealthier classes, things were a little better, but still strange. Some houses had hip baths, small tubs where you sat awkwardly, half submerged, scrubbing with soap that didn't lather the way ours does. The soaps themselves were harsh, made with animal fat and lye, strong enough to peel the skin off your patients. No wonder many women simply avoided them. Perfume felt kinder than caustic soap, even if it meant walking around like a flower-scented chimney. There's a certain irony you can't help noticing. In the very era obsessed with propriety, where manners were polished to a shine, their bodies often weren't. Women powdered their faces, tightened corsets, arranged curls but underneath. Days of sweat lingered, and still, somehow, no one talked about it. It was as if the silence itself masked the smell, like ignoring the elephant in the room and pretending it's just an oddly shaped sofa. And yes, some public bathhouses still operated, but these weren't sparkling wellness centers. You didn't get cucumbers for your eyes or soothing background music. Instead, you might step into cloudy water that had already seen 3 strangers that morning. Some even shared bath water within the same family. Think about borrowing your siblings' borrowing their bath water. That's love on another level. Historians still debate how common this practice really was in middle-class households. But the whispers are enough to make you thankful for your private shower. Sometimes, water wasn't even the first choice. Alternatives existed: dry rubbing with cloths, vinegar rinses, or wiping down with sponges dipped in herbs. You close your eyes and almost feel the sting of vinegar on your skin. Refreshing. Maybe effective. Questionable. But for them, it was a ritual, and rituals feel comforting even when they don't make sense. Like us buying detox teas that work mostly by sending us to the bathroom more often. One woman might even swear by a quick wipe with rose water each morning, dabbing delicately as though it erased yesterday's grime. Another insisted on cold water, plunges shocking dips meant to invigorate. You imagine stepping into icy water with no central heating waiting afterward, then walking around all day in damp clothes. A spa treatment, more like a medieval punishment disguised as self-care. And yet, despite it all, they got used to it. Their noses adjusted, their expectations shifted. When everyone around you is in the same boat, the smell isn't quite so noticeable. You, however, sitting here centuries later with your scented shampoo and your hot water tap, you would notice immediately. You'd step into a Victorian parlour, take one deep breath and start plotting your escape. But here's the strange comfort: they managed. They lived, worked, courted, even fell in love while bathing less in a year than you might in a week. You start to wonder if maybe our obsession with daily showers is more cultural than medical. Sure, bacteria and cleanliness matter, but perhaps we've Still, let's not romanticize. You wouldn't want to trade your bathroom for their tub in the corner of a cold kitchen. As the image lingers, you hear the sound of boiling kettles, the clatter of pots, the groan of someone hauling another bucket up the stairs. You see a young woman shivering as she lowers herself into lukewarm water, wincing as the harsh soap bites her skin. She lasts a few minutes, then climbs out quickly, rubbing dry with a rough towel. She doesn't look refreshed, just relieved it's over. And tomorrow she will smell again. But no one will say a word. You smile, half amused, half horrified. Because, really, what else could they do? Bathing was rare, inconvenient, and sometimes more trouble than it was worth. And yet, beneath the grime, people still courted and married, still danced in ballrooms, still whispered sweet nothings. Maybe love was stronger than smell, or maybe noses were weaker. Either way, the world spun on, baths or no baths. You stay where you are. The lamplight soft against your face, and watch as a tiny storm of white rises from a porcelain pot. A woman close by lifts the lid with the careful reverence of someone opening a letter from an old lover. The little puff of powder flutters up and settles on her cheek like a blizzard the size of a thumbnail. It clings to the hollow beneath her eye, to the line of her jaw, to the fine hairs at her temple. You feel the chalk on your fingertips, even though you haven't touched it. You can almost taste the dust at the back of your throat. This is how they painted themselves, that swipe for paleness, that soft smudge for propriety. In this room, powder is not decoration. It is a mask, a proclamation, a small, secret armor. The powders come in jars, in little puffs wrapped in silk, in the powdered hearts of sachets. Some are light as flour, others grainy, with a weight that speaks of ingredients picked for effect rather than safety. You know, as you listen to the soft scuff of fabric and the faint clink of glass, that some of these mixtures were chosen because they worked at changing how the world read a face. Pale skin says you do not labor outdoors. It says you belong to rooms lit by candlelight rather than to fields. To wear a white face is to claim a class you didn't have to earn with a shovel. It is, in its own way, an early, very theatrical form of branding. Around the powder sits perfume, and perfume here is not a whisper. It is a declaration that arrives before you do and stays after you leave. Bottles are uncorked with a casual flourish of someone offering tea. Scents pour out dense, layered, often clinging to fabric like a rumor. You do not spritz. You baptize. A quick dab becomes a generous sweep. A wrist dab turns into a generous application along the neck, under the chin, inside the gown where the scent can hide and work for days. A woman's dress will carry that scent into drawing rooms, into carriages, into the offices of men who are paid to take note of reputations. The room becomes saturated, each new scent meeting the last mid-air and marrying into something that smells less of single flowers than of a whole feverish garden. There are reasons for the excess that feel oddly familiar and painfully modern. Perfume masks what the soap could not reach. Powder hides a face that has been out in smoke, in soot, in the sticky sweat of a city that does not offer you a hot shower at the end of the day. When dryness is a status symbol, a little dust will do the job of a million skincare ads. You might recognize the Logic dry shampoo for the Victorian soul. We've all sprayed away another hour of personal maintenance with something faster. A substitute that performs the look of cleanliness without the labor. The difference is dramatic. Where your dry shampoo quietly conceals, their powders sometimes contained lead or other harsh minerals that made paleness permanent and danger invisible. Some of the tricks they use are the kind of things you laugh about, quietly, because otherwise you'd cry. A woman tucks a scented bag into her glove and exhales into it for a faint breath of civility. Another sprinkles powder into her bonnet to keep lice at bay. The same powder that dusts the hem of her dress and the crease of her elbow. There are tales of powders being used across fabrics and wigs, dusted into hair to take down grease and make a style hold. The wig maker's broom is as valued as the seamstress's needle. It's almost impressive, the lengths to which they go to keep up appearances. An entire economy of scent and dust. All of it pretending to be natural. You notice too how scent becomes social punctuation. A 2-week aroma can be read as stinginess or poor breeding. A too bold scent can be branded as vulgar. The choice of fragrance is a conversation with the room. You might smile, imagining influencers today agonizing over a filter or a palette. Their quarrels would seem small beside a conversation about whether your eau de jasmine declares you respectable or showy. That tension between masking and meaning wasn't lost on anyone then, and it hasn't gone away now. People still judge a lot by very small signals. Only our signals now are curated in pixels rather than powders. There's a quieter, less showy reason for the heavy perfumes, too. The city smells of coal and horses and a stew of other people's days mingling in the alleyways. People believed that good smells could keep out bad airs. You hear this belief threaded through their letters and prescriptions. Scent as protection, scent as medicine. Scholars continue to puzzle over how much of that practice was about public health thinking and how much was about performance. Some argue scent was ritual and defense against disease, believed to ride on odors. Others see it more plainly as the language of social distinction, an audible, or rather olfactory, costume. The truth, as is often the case, probably sits in the middle. Like a faint bloom of perfume you can't quite place. There are poorer substitutes, too, and those are the parts that make you wince. Where a rich woman may blot a cheek with a puff of white lead, a poorer neighbor might rub her face with starch or a dusting of flour, or use cheap colognes that leave a chemical temps. Some remedies sound clever and cruel at once. Powders that promise to lighten the skin so you'd look younger and of a better class. Lotions that removed the sun's proof of work but left their users paler and more fragile. It reads like the worst kind of beauty advice, the kind that comes with a compare and contradict twist. You think of modern detoxes and the quick-fix culture around brightening creams and wonder if beneath centuries the pattern is the same. There is also an intimacy to watching someone powder and perfume themselves. It's a private ritual performed in public. Fingers move with the economy of practiced gestures. The puff is pressed, the wrist twisted, the scent dabbed. You lean into that intimacy, not to pry, but because the small acts teach you about what matters to them. You feel a closeness to a woman you will never meet, closer than you might to some celebrity whose face you scroll past, with the same gossamer boundary between public and private that you know intimately in your own life. The performance is tender, ridiculous, and human, all at once. You breathe in and the room blooms. Jasmine, musk, a metallic undertone that could be the powder itself. That could be the faint smell of copper from a kettle. The scent settles in your bones, and there is that small, embarrassed laugh you can't help because you recognize your own compromises. We have our sprays and serums, our color correctors and filters, our small cheats that help us be what we want the world to read. They had jars and puffs, and the conviction that if the face read leisure, then life might bend toward it. A faint cough comes from the hallway, polite footsteps away, and the porcelain lid returns to its place. Powder dust trickles to the table and disappears into the grain of the wood like a memory should. You exhale slowly, the sound soft, and the little cloud of white drifts away, leaving a gentle, almost apologetic sweetness behind. You tilt your head and catch the glimmer of a comb sliding through a thick, coiled mass of hair. The room smells faintly of lavender water, though the sweetness can't quite cover the sharp oil that seeps from strands unwashed for weeks. Hair here isn't just decoration, it's a record. A ledger of effort or neglect. A crown that speaks louder than words about who you are. Washing it, though, is a rarity. Water and soap are whispered about as if they were dangerous strangers. Too much dampness, they say, will weaken the scalp, invite chills, and even madness. You can almost laugh at that Cure shampoo aisle back home looks like a rainbow army compared to their one bar of harsh soap and a bottle of oil. The women bend close to mirrors that catch the lamplight. Pins are slid in with swift precision, and hair is twisted into braids, buns, and coils heavy enough to ache the neck. A servant's hands move quickly, tugging just enough to tighten, never enough to pull the mistress out of her composure. You hear the faint crackle of starch and powder falling onto shoulders. Some wigs arrive in boxes, plump and styled, ready to perch atop natural hair like loyal pets. Once in place, they turn women into visions volumes, higher faces longer, youth faked with curls, sculpted from horsehair or human locks purchased in markets. The idea that another person's hair sits upon your head might unsettle you now, but here it's a mark of elegance, the kind of extravagance you almost respect. Still, underneath the grandeur sits a far less glamorous truth. Lice fleas, itches scratched discreetly beneath lace caps. To battle this, they dust wigs with powder, sometimes with arsenic laced in, believing poison would kill the intruders before it harmed the wearer. Imagine leaning in for a kiss and wondering whether your partner's hair might be laced with something you'd find on a rat trap. A little absurd, yes, but strangely consistent with their world appearance at any cost. There's a story told in hushed tones about certain wigs being so rarely cleaned that they developed their own ecosystems. Is it exaggerated? Probably, but you wouldn't be surprised if some truth lingers inside the joke. After all, a wig left on a stand for months could gather dust and tiny guests with alarming ease. Modern horror stories about roommates leaving dirty dishes feel tame compared to the possibility of sharing a room with a hairpiece that twitches when the candlelight shifts. Hair washing itself, when it happened, involved oils and vinegar rinses. Picture the sting in the eyes, the slickness that clings to your hands, the smell that clung to pillows long after. No citrus shampoo glow, here just the sense you've done something bracing, possibly like. Even the bravest didn't do it often. Instead, brushing was the real ritual. Long strokes, night after night, believed to coax health and shine. There's something soothing in that repetition. Bristles pulling gently, rhythm steady, the scalp tingling with warmth. You could almost fall asleep to the sound of it, the same way some of us scroll endlessly before bed, lulled by the pointless motion. Wigs themselves weren't just fashion. They were identity shifts. A new wig meant a new version of yourself. A reinvention purchased at a shop and worn into parlors where everyone pretended not to notice. Hair loss, disease, or just a bad season, none of it mattered if you had the right curls at the ready. Some historians argue wigs were more about hygiene than style, since you could remove and treat them when lice became unbearable. Others say it was vanity, pure and simple, an extension of the same impulse that drove people to suffocate themselves in perfume. Likely both are true, tangled together like strands of hair that no comb can separate without breaking. You catch sight of a maid holding a heated tongue, pressing it briefly to a lock to create a curl that springs like a question mark. The hiss is faint, the smell of singed hair unmistakable. It's not so far from the scent of a modern flat iron, that quiet sacrifice of strands in pursuit of smoothness. You smile a little at the recognition that tools change. The desperation does not dot. And then there's the gossip tied into every strand. A woman's hair might signal her marital status, her age, her virtue. A loose curl peeking from a bonnet could stir whispers. A too dark dye might mark her as vain. Secrets sat not only in what was worn, but in what was hidden grey roots powdered away. Thinning patched with clever combing, wigs swapped between sisters like shared confessions. The hairline was both private and public property, a stage where respectability performed daily. The more you watch, the more you realize hair is less about beauty and more about survival in this place. To maintain it, to adorn it, to disguise at each act is a shield. Against judgment, against sickness, against the creeping truth that life here is harsher than the satin ribbons suggest. It makes you wonder about your own rituals, the morning gel, the conditioner that promises miracles, the nervous smoothing of stray strands before a meeting. You're not so far away, after all. Different jars, same hopes. A draft creeps through the room, lifting a lock of powdered hair, and you notice how it floats, fragile and ridiculous, before falling back into place. The mirror reflects it as flawless, but you know better. You know the weight, the itch, the secret beneath the surface. You breathe out slowly, amused and a little charmed, letting the scene fade as though the powder itself has drifted. Across your vision and settled in your memory, you notice the smile first, wide and eager, though it carries a secret you cannot unsee once you look closer. The teeth are uneven, yellowed by years of tea, and the breath, well, let's just say you would not want to be standing too close. In Victorian life, oral care is less about minty freshness and more about survival, and even that feels generous. Toothbrushes exist, yes, but think less sleek plastic handle and more a carved piece of bone bristling with stiff hog hair. Bristles that splay quickly, that smell faintly of the animal they came from, dragged across gums already inflamed. Imagine trying to start your morning with that scratching at your mouth. Suddenly, your overpriced electric toothbrush humming at home feels like a small miracle. The room where you sit is warm, candles flickering, the faint metallic taste of air clinging to your tongue. A woman leans in, delicately patting her lips with a cloth, then tries to smile as though nothing is wrong. You know she is probably rinsed earlier with something sharp and strange. Maybe vinegar, maybe straight spirits. It burns, it stings. But at least for a few moments, it numbs the ache of a tooth that has long since lost its battle against decay. The truth is, toothache here is as common as coughs and almost as accepted. People live with pain until it becomes unbearable. Then comes the dentist, who in this era is often just a barber with a stronger stomach. You hear the faint sound of metal against metal, a pair of forceps laid down on a tray. It looks more like a blacksmith's tool than anything you would allow in your mouth. A man in a waistcoat wipes his brow, already preparing for the next extraction. An audience of curious onlookers gathers round, because pulling teeth in public is a spectacle, a grim little theatre. The cries, the sudden silence, the bloody grin when it is all over it, is entertainment of a sort. Strange how a world that covers itself in lace and perfume also treats dental agony as a street show. And if you are wondering about dentures, oh, they have them. Ivory, wood, even porcelain. But the most unsettling sets are crafted from real human teeth, bought from the poor or harvested from battlefields where soldiers had no further use for them. They call them Waterloo teeth in a kind of grim joke, as if wearing the molars of the dead could ever be fashionable. The oddest part is how casually they are discussed, as though sliding someone else's enamel into your own mouth is no stranger than changing gloves. Try imagining your dentist today offering you a set of second-hand molars and see how quickly you sprint for the door. Yet people crave the appearance of a smile, even if the reality is less than charming. Women paint lips to distract from discolored teeth, keep their mouths closed in portraits, or hide behind fans while speaking. Bad breath lingers, a heavy cloud scented faintly with decay, layered over with cloves or crushed mint leaves if fortune allows. Some chew on sticks of licorice root, swearing it cleans the teeth, while others scrub with abrasive powders that strip enamel faster than they clean. A few even rub their gums with soot, believing the dark color masks the rot. Practical in its own twisted way. The funny thing is, society still praises a lovely smile. Courtship dances, whispered conversations, stolen glances all lean heavily on the hope that when lips part, the view is tolerable. You picture two people leaning close in candlelight, the perfume heavy, the wigs powdered, and then, suddenly, the faint whiff of vinegar breath creeping in like an unwelcome guest. Romance has always had its hurdles, but this one feels particularly daunting. Not everything is dreadful, though. There is something oddly tender about the nightly ritual of brushing with that crude brush, about a husband holding a candle while his wife leans into the mirror, about the patience it requires. It is messy, ineffective, and sometimes dangerous, but it is still care. It is still a small attempt at comfort in a world where pain is expected. You hear laughter across the room, the kind of laughter that tries to mask embarrassment. A young woman cracks a joke about her missing molar, calling it a gap for future secrets. Humor becomes a shield, a way to soften the blow of imperfection. It is familiar. Really, people today joke about their dental bills the same way. Only now the cost comes from the bank rather than a battlefield. The smell of clove oil lingers, sharp and spicy, used to soothe toothaches and freshen breath all at once. It is strong enough to sting your eyes, but it does its job. There is something comforting in knowing that even centuries ago, people clung to tiny rituals that gave them relief, however fleeting. A drop of oil, a rinse of spirits, a ragged brush against teeth, it all whispers the same truth. Survival dressed up as civility. As the candlelight flickers lower, you notice how shadows soften the imperfections. Teeth hidden, breath disguised by the sweet smoke of a nearby pipe, smiles carefully measured. The illusion of grace holds, at least until the morning comes again. You let out a slow breath, amused and a little sympathetic, and allow the image of those crooked smiles to drift into the haze of memory, fading like the last note of a song. The fabric rustles as she shifts in her chair. Layer upon layer, settling back into place like bricks in a wall. From a distance, she looks perfectly composed, a vision of elegance draped in silk and lace. But you, sitting this close, can almost feel the weight pressing down. Beneath the gown lies an entire world that few ever see. A world less glamorous than the polished exterior would have you believe. Imagine wearing 3, sometimes 4, heavy skirts, each trapping heat, sweat, and the faint sour smell of skin-denied air. It is like wrapping yourself in a duvet, then deciding to attend a ball in the middle of summer. You would not last 10 minutes, and yet, here, women spend entire evenings pretending nothing is wrong. You lean forward and notice the faint sheen on her neck, the tiny bead of perspiration making its escape. The corset beneath her dress is laced tight, so tight you can hear her breaths shortened, ribs compressing, stomach flattened into obedience. Yes, she stands straight, shoulders proud, but inside, her organs are squished into negotiations they never agreed to. One wrong twist and a fainting spell is inevitable, which is why the fainting couch exists in nearly every parlor. It is less a piece of furniture and more a medical necessity disguised as decor. Picture modern gyms selling treadmills with built-in stretchers, same logic. Different furniture. And then there is the matter of undergarments. Not the delicate lace fantasies you see in movies, but long chemises and drawers, heavy cotton that clings uncomfortably. They absorb sweat but rarely see soap, so the scent is layered, a mixture of perfume, powder, body, and time. You begin to realize why they poured half a bottle of cologne before stepping out. It was not indulgence. It was survival. A maid enters quietly, her hands practiced, lifting layers of skirt to adjust a crinoline cage, that skeletal structure of whalebone and steel. The gown balloons outward, an architectural feat more than a piece of clothing, a moving sculpture. Beautiful, yes, but when she tries to pass through the doorway, the edges catch, scraping the wood frame. You stifle a smile. Even the grandest fashions cannot escape the comedy of everyday physics. Sitting in such a contraption is its own art angles carefully calculated to avoid. Collapse. The less spoken truth hides in the inconveniences. To relieve oneself, for example, is a delicate dance of fabric and patience, performed with the help of chamber pots tucked discreetly behind screens. Some gowns are so voluminous that navigating the task feels like steering a ship into harbor. There is even a story of women wearing specially designed split drawers, which made the process easier though hardly more dignified. It is the kind of practical design you would expect from camping gear, not high society fashion. The heat builds as the evening progresses. Picture a ballroom, chandeliers blazing, bodies moving, skirts brushing against one another. Underneath, stockings grow damp, corset strings dig deeper, the faint smell of wool and human effort rising like steam. The orchestra plays on, violins soaring, but you know the real endurance test is happening beneath those gowns. A smile here, a graceful bow there, all masking the truth that everyone is dreaming of peeling off fabric in the privacy of their chambers. What fascinates you most is how normal it feels to them. This daily discomfort, this ritual of layering, of binding, of suffocating, is embraced as elegance. They measure beauty in sacrifice, as though dignity is only earned through discomfort. And yet, in a small corner of your mind, you cannot help but compare it to your own wardrobe struggles. The tight jeans that cut circulation, the stiff shoes that leave blisters, the absurd insistence that suffering somehow equals style. Some things never change, only the fabrics do. A lesser-known truth whispers through the folds of fabric. Mice, yes, mice, sometimes found nesting in stored gowns that sat too long unworn, nibbling at lace and leaving behind unpleasant surprises. There are tales of women putting on dresses, only to find tiny holes chewed near the hem, an uninvited signature from the creatures of the household. It is not the detail you see in paintings, but it is the detail that makes the past suddenly real. A little too real. As you watch the woman adjust her skirts, you notice the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders ease only when she thinks no one is looking. Underneath the elegance is a human being, hot, tired, a little breathless, longing for comfort. The gown is her armor, her prison, her disguise, and as the candlelight flickers, casting shadows across the satin folds, you realize that what is hidden beneath is not just fabric and sweat, but the unspoken truth of a society that demanded perfection, no matter the cost. You exhale slowly, letting the rustle of skirts fade in your mind, as though the fabric itself is settling into silence. The image lingers, layers upon layers, beauty and burden woven tightly together, impossible to separate. You step outside and it hits you before you even take 2 breaths. The Victorian city does not ease you into its atmosphere. No, it shoves it straight up your nose. Imagine the smell of horses, damp stone, and a questionable fish pie left too long in the sun, all tangled together and served warm. That is just the street. You stand on the curb, skirts brushing filth, boots sticking a little to whatever has been tossed out of a bucket, and you try not to gag. It is a daily test of endurance. People talk about character being built through hardship, but really, nothing builds grit quite like learning to inhale as little as possible on a London afternoon. The crowd swirls around you. Children dart through gaps, clutching bread crusts. A man selling roasted chestnuts shouts, his cart steaming in the chill air. But the sweet smoke is instantly swallowed by the reek of sewage drifting from the gutter. You think of modern air fresheners promising ocean breeze. Here, you get river breeze, and unfortunately, the Thames is not exactly the Caribbean. Still, people push on. A horse pulls a carriage past you, tail swishing, leaving behind a steaming gift for the next unlucky boot. No one even flinches. That is how normal it is. The street is a symphony, and every instrument plays off-key. Now step into a theater. For a moment, the glamour distracts you. Red velvet curtains, chandeliers, dripping light like honey. Ladies whispering behind their fans, men straightening gloves. It looks elegant. But sit down, breathe deep, and you notice it again. Heavy perfume clouds the air, roses and violets sprayed with abandon. Underneath, though, the smell of sweat seeps through the fine clothes. These gowns are layers upon layers, and under the heat of the lamps, every body glows damp. Deodorant, you realize, has not been invented yet. Perfume is not a choice, but survival. You shift in your seat, catching a whiff of powder mingled with the faint odor of damp wool. Suddenly, the play on stage is not the only drama. The real performance is in the audience. 1,000 cents wrestling for dominance. The funny part is, people believed the stronger the smell, the healthier it made you. Doctors claimed certain odors kept illness away, so folks carried pomanders, little balls filled with spices or herbs, dangling from chains like jewelry. You see a woman clutch one and hold it near her nose, as if sniffing cinnamon might block the stench of 50 bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. Strangely enough, Historians cannot quite agree on whether people actually thought these worked or just liked having something to pretend with. Either way, the sight of a lady delicately sniffing her pomander while the man beside her sneezes into a handkerchief has its comedy dot. And then there are the ballrooms. Candlelight flickers, violins hum, skirts sweep across polished floors. At first glance, it is breathtaking. Couples spin, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. But keep standing there long enough, and you catch the truth. Every twirl lifts a wave of fragrance, and not the good kind. There is cologne so sharp it could strip paint, mixed with the must of wool coats stacked in the corner. The candles themselves add a faint smell of smoke and tallow. People lean close, whispering over the music. And you think how lucky it is that polite society trained everyone to keep a straight face. Imagine laughing mid-waltz because your partner smells like boiled cabbage. There is a secret fact that hides beneath all of this. Some theaters and halls actually hired people to sprinkle vinegar on the floorboards. The idea was to purify the air and tamp down the dust. Instead, you get the smell of pickles joining the orchestra. It does not ruin the night, but it certainly makes your shoes stick a little. You picture future tourists buying scented candles labeled Victorian ballroom. They would expect roses and sandalwood. In truth, the authentic scent would be vinegar, sweat, wax, and damp wool. Not exactly a bestseller, but the streets remain the harshest lesson. In summer, the heat cooks everything. The Thames itself becomes a warning. Newspapers wrote about the Great Stink of 1858, when the smell of the river grew so unbearable that Parliament hung soaked curtains over its windows to survive meetings. Picture lawmakers gagging behind cloth dipped in lime water. It is funny in a tragic way, like watching someone try to sip tea while holding their nose. And yet the city survived, people carried on, and life marched forward. That resilience is both admirable and absurd. Think of yourself walking home after a night out. In the modern world, maybe you complain about passing a dumpster. Here, it is an entire city that smells like one, and no one blinks. Children chase hoops, street musicians play fiddles, and lovers lean close under gas lamps, ignoring the odor that clings to everything. You realize that the human nose is both fragile and stubborn. Give it long enough, and it adjusts. What was unbearable in the morning feels almost normal by nightfall. The strange thing is, many Victorians embraced it. Smell was part of life, a shared burden, and sometimes even a point of pride. A butcher stood proudly before his stall, slabs of meat glistening, flies buzzing, the air sharp with iron and salt. A baker pulled loaves from his oven, the yeasty warmth battling the stink from across the street. You could wander from stall to stall, assaulted and comforted all at once. That was the city, always layered, always too much, and yet somehow alive. So you keep walking, skirts swishing, boots damp, breath shallow. You let the city wrap around you, foul and fascinating. You tell yourself not to laugh, but when a carriage splashes past, flinging muddy water that smells suspiciously like something worse, you cannot help it. This is life. Messy, overwhelming, unforgettable. And strangely, it lulls you, because once you accept the smells, you realize the rhythm of it all. Every street has its tune, every hall its perfume, every ballroom its smoky haze. Together, they make a lullaby, pungent and imperfect, but steady enough to carry you on. You settle back into the hush of the room, the lamplight soft against your cheek, and the first sound you notice is a cough, thin and persistent, like a metronome that keeps time with worry. The doctor arrives with his bag, leather warm at the edges, his hands steady from practice and perhaps from habit. He does not speak loudly. He moves with a ritual calm, setting down tools with a care that both reassures and unsettles. In this world, medicine is part consolation and part show. A careful attempt to assert control over a body that feels fragile under candlelight. You watch as a small jar is opened, dark and glistening, and the smell of carbolic or camphor rises to meet you. Bright and medicinal, sprays of vinegar hang on strings, sachets stuffed with thyme tuck into curtains, and a nurse will press a warm compress to a brow as if that touch alone might steer fever away. People trust scent because scent feels active, and there is a steady repetition of small acts that say you care, even when the cure is uncertain. Leeches are set to the skin with an odd tenderness, small bodies sliding and clinging, drawing out a quiet shock of red. Bloodletting sits in the same category of remedy, accepted by many as a way to balance the humors. You see it and you wince, but you also see the relief in an exhausted face when the ritual is done. The idea that shedding a little blood could reset the body feels almost ritualistic, like untangling a knot with a careful pull. Then there is laudanum, that dark syrup kept beside condolence notes and teacups. A woman will slip a spoon to a crying child, and the sobs soften into sleep as the opiate spreads through small limbs. It is called mercy in many houses because sleep can be an answer where nothing else helps. Later, consequences are harsh, but in the moment, the tenderness holds. You are aware of remedies that read like kitchen alchemy. A poultice of bread and onion is warmed and pressed to a chest. A boiled cabbage leaf is wrapped and tied as if it could hold fever at bay. It feels domestic, a comfort made in the moment, as if healing must pass through the hands that cook and mend. There is a humility in these acts, a belief that attention and warmth can divert an illness. Few of their practices are safe by our standards. Mercury and other heavy metals appear in tonics and pills, worn as a kind of brave signature of cure. People take these preparations hoping for balance or vivacity, and sometimes they return with new ailments born of the treatment. You cannot help but feel for them, because error has always been companion to care. It feels oddly modern, like trusting a miracle cure advertised on a screen. There are curious methods that surprise you, a mixture of ingenuity and desperation. Tobacco smoke enemas are used in some places to revive those who have drowned, a practice that sits oddly between revival and theatre. Other treatments smear arsenic into cosmetic pastes because paleness equals status, and the desire to be seen as refined outweighs the slow cost to a liver. These are the strange trade-offs where beauty and health bargain with one another. A debate hums beneath the surface of all of this. Many trust that bad air carries disease, and they act accordingly, lighting incense and bathing sheets in vinegar. Others, quieter and stubborn, begin to argue that cleanliness of hands and instruments matters, that invisible agents move from one patient to another. Letters pass between men who perform surgeries, and a small revolution begins, one scrubbed instrument at a time. Some practitioners embrace the new methods with a relief that is almost devotion, and others grumble that new habits smell faintly of fear and too much like responsibility. You also register the economy of cure, how poverty shapes what help looks like. A family will barter a hen for a visit, a mother will choose bread over a bottle, and the poor may wait until a child is dangerously ill before a neighbor with more resources can offer a tincture. Care is measured against daily needs, and you sense the moral ache in those choices. The room cools at the edges as you imagine that calculation, and compassion wraps around the small private tragedies. Still, tenderness exists everywhere. A surgeon who must pull a tooth will also press a hand to a trembling shoulder, calming through touch, sharing both pragmatic skill and human presence. The ritual of care, even when it misfires, is often a ritual of closeness. You feel it in the way a nurse smooths a blanket, in the way a father hums a tone while the poultice is applied. The gestures matter as much as the remedies. When you leave the house, the street greets you with its own lessons. The sight of a public notice pleading for cleanliness near a workhouse, the faint smell of vinegar from a hung curtain. After cholera outbreaks, public health conversations have started to thread through daily life, and even small practices change because people notice patterns. Slowly, very slowly, habits shift, and the old certainties lose some of their command. You fold the image into your memory, the small figure asleep after a spoonful of mercy, the doctor packing away his instruments, the sound of the house settling into its own quiet. The past is messy and earnest, flawed and kind in strange measures. You carry the lesson that care can be both wrong and loving, and that progress often begins in the hush of one room when someone decides to wash and try something different. You breathe out, the lamplight blurs, and the scene slides away like a last soft note that lingers just long enough to matter. The quiet of the house deepens as the last footsteps fade down the corridor, and you find yourself standing in the dim warmth of a bedroom where the real stories of Victorian life happened, whispered and hidden. Here, behind drawn curtains and thick drapes, intimacy carried its own complicated fragrance. The flicker of gaslight made everything softer, gentler, but it could not erase the layers of scent that clung to fabric, skin, and breath. You sit at the edge of the bed, and the silence feels almost alive, holding secrets that no polite parlor conversation would ever allow. In marriage, tenderness was often entangled with compromise. Picture the slow, careful process of disrobing, the corset unlaced with fingers fumbling after too much wine, the petticoats dropping in layers that seemed endless. It was like peeling an onion, except instead of tears from the eyes, there were sighs of relief as the body finally escaped its confinement. And once the final layer gave way, there was the body itself, unfiltered, carrying the scent of hours or even days without soap. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but they, accustomed to this rhythm, met each other with acceptance. Perhaps that was part of love then, not expecting roses, but learning to breathe through reality. Still, they tried. A dash of rosewater behind the ears, a sachet of herbs hidden in the folds of a pillow, a hurried rinse of vinegar water in private chambers before climbing under the covers. Odd methods, yes, but full of hope. Imagine dabbing yourself with a slice of lemon and calling it an aphrodisiac shower. You laugh, but maybe it worked, or at least convinced them it did. And sometimes belief is half the battle. Desire does not wait for convenience. Even when soap was expensive, even when water for bathing was seen as indulgent or even risky, couples still found each other in the hush of the night. A hand reaching across the sheets, fingers brushing against a collarbone. The warmth of breath, so close you cannot decide whether to lean in or lean away. You almost admire the courage it must have taken to pursue intimacy when the odds of fresh cleanliness were so low. And what of the unmarried, the seekers of affection outside their own walls? The city was full of encounters, discreetly arranged in rented rooms or dimly lit alleys. A gentleman might flood himself with cologne, so heavy it entered the room like a herald. A woman might powder her chest so thick that the candlelight reflected off her like porcelain. In those moments, hygiene was not the star of the show. It was the distraction, the polite illusion that passion was stronger than the senses. And in a way, it was. People still returned, still sought warmth and touch, even knowing the risk that tomorrow's sheets would whisper of sweat and powder. You cannot help comparing it to modern times. Today, people swipe left if someone's profile picture has bad lighting. Yet back then, you could walk into a room carrying the aroma of boiled cabbage and still find a partner. Maybe that is progress. Or maybe it is proof that attraction has never been as logical as we pretend. There were, of course, whispered debates about cleanliness in private life. Some doctors encouraged rinsing certain parts of the body daily, though what they meant by rinsing was often more a polite pat with a damp rag than anything you would call washing. Others warned that too much water in intimate areas could lead to illness, or, worse, moral corruption. Yes, they truly believed that excessive bathing might ignite inappropriate urges. You smirk at the thought modern gyms could put them into cardiac arrest with their showers and steam rooms. Lesser-known detail floats to mind, almost absurd. Some couples used bread, soft and fresh, as a sort of primitive sponge, believing it could absorb oils and odors before an embrace. It sounds like satire, but bread in the bedroom was not always for eating. And while you chuckle, you realize it reveals something deeply human. The willingness to improvise when science had not yet caught up with desire. Not all intimacy happened willingly, and not all marriages were kind. But in the quiet corners where tenderness did exist, partners found small ways to make each other comfortable. Brushing hair gently, offering a sip of warm wine, or whispering in low voices that carried more affection than words themselves. Those details make you pause, because they remind you that even through powder and odor, people reached for closeness, for reassurance, for the softness of skin against skin, outside the sanctity of marriage. The brothels of London and beyond became their own worlds of ritual. Women there knew how to mask reality with scented oils, quick wipes, and layers of powder that created the illusion of freshness. Clients pretended to believe it, and maybe they really did in the flicker of gaslight. Historians sometimes suggest that the illusions themselves were part of the appeal, that the act of hiding imperfections made the encounter more alluring. Others disagree, arguing that people simply had no better options. You smile at the irony we still argue today about filters on photos, whether they enhance beauty or hide the truth. Different century, same debate. Back in the bedroom, the hush lingers. You picture two people lying close, breath mingling, the reality of sweat and perfume wrapped around them like another blanket. There is humor in the awkwardness, yes, but also a kind of grace. They leaned in despite it all, choosing warmth over distance, presence over discomfort. And maybe that is the truest lesson hidden in those whispered realities. Intimacy has never been about perfection. It has always been about two people deciding that, even in the face of imperfection. Closeness matters more than air that smells like roses. The curtain shifts in the faint night breeze. The gaslight flickers, and you let the image soften. For a moment, you can almost hear the sighs of centuries past. Quiet reminders that love, lust, and laughter have always managed to bloom. Even in the most inconvenient of circumstances, you breathe in, slowly, as though the entire century itself exhales with you. The candles have burned low, The gowns have been hung back into closets. The streets have grown quieter, and yet the smells, those faithful companions of your journey, still linger, faint as whispers. Imagine it, the soap that wasn't quite soap, the gown that looked heavenly, but felt like a corset-trapped prison, the doctors with their strange cures, and the intimacy that was anything but simple. All of it swirls around you now like a perfume that refuses to fade. You're lying in your chamber, listening to the drip of rain against a warped window pane. London doesn't really sleep, it sighs, groans, rattles, like an old house settling into its beams. Outside, a carriage wheel clatters over loose stones. Somewhere in a neighboring room, a servant coughs into their sleeve. And beneath all this, beneath the layers of linen, lace, and expectation, you sense the pulse of a city that has been your reluctant bedfellow. It's funny, isn't it? We like to think of history as polished, clean marble statues, neatly bound books, well-dressed figures moving gracefully through parlors. But what you've seen is the softer underbelly, the stink, the discomfort, the whispered jokes traded under breath. And yet, wasn't it all strangely comforting, knowing that even amid the perfumes and powders, everyone was just human, sweaty, nervous, insecure, trying to hide little flaws beneath the starch of respectability. Take the ballrooms, for instance. Yes, they glittered. Yes, they dazzled. But if you close your eyes, you still smell the combination. Wax dripping from chandeliers, damp wool cloaks left at the door, hair oil heating under candle flames. And then there's the reality of dancing in layers upon layers of gowns and coats. Everyone moving elegantly, but also slightly out of breath. Romance mixed with perspiration. That, dear listener, is the scent of authenticity. You smile a little at the thought of intimacy. History tends to paint it with soft brushes, silk sheets, fluttering fans, a stolen kiss. But you know better now. You've seen the quiet negotiations over hygiene, the whispered bargains of marriages, the way even a prince's chamber was not immune to the aroma of chamber pots. Love, it turns out, is not about roses on pillows. It's about tolerating the smell of the other person's boots at the end of the day. And doctors, they were supposed to help, weren't they? Yet half their advice belonged more in fairy tales than science. A sip of mercury for vitality. Don't mind if it kills you. A prescription for fresh air, as though you didn't already breathe the city's coal smoke. Wonderful. And yet people believed, trusted, hoped. Isn't that always the way? Humans cling to the illusion that someone, somewhere, has the answer, even if the answer comes in the form of leeches. Historians still debate, you think to yourself with a grin, whether people truly believed all these cures worked, or whether they just played along. Perhaps it didn't matter. Belief itself is sometimes the best medicine, or at least it distracts you long enough that the real ailment gets bored and wanders off. Now, as the night deepens, you sense how fragile this world was. Beneath the gowns and perfumes, beneath the proud facades, life was constantly negotiating with discomfort. Yet maybe that's why laughter mattered so much. A small joke shared over a supper table could soften the sting of a long day. A wink across a crowded ballroom could make you forget the smell of 50 unwashed wigs. Humor was survival. And perhaps, dear friend, it still is. Let's take one last walk together, shall we? Picture yourself stepping into a quiet London street. The fog curls low, wrapping the gas lamps in halos of pale gold. The air carries a mixture: coal, smoke, damp earth, bread cooling in a baker's shop, and yes, something less pleasant wafting from the gutter. You inhale it all, because that is the truth of it, beauty and filth entwined. You walk slowly, boots tapping on the stones, and for once, no one is rushing. The city seems to hum around you like a lullaby played on mismatched instruments. You pass a window where a couple argues in hushed voices, not about love, but about laundry. You glimpse a young girl carrying a pail of water, trying not to spill it on her skirts. You see a clerk locking his office, shoulders slumped, dreams already weighed down by tomorrow's ledgers. Each of them a story, each of them caught in the same web of scents and silences. As you turn the corner, you notice the Thames. The river moves lazily, reflecting shreds of moonlight. It smells, yes, of rot and refuse, but also of salt, of tide, of something eternal. The water carries everything away, eventually the soaps, the gowns, the myths, the secrets. Time, like the river, has a way of scrubbing even the most stubborn stains, and here you are, leaning on the railing, watching the current, breathing slowly, letting your shoulders loosen. History no longer feels distant. It feels like a blanket, worn thin but warm. You realize the people you've met along this journey weren't so different from you. They wanted comfort, affection, a little respect, maybe a better smelling world. Some things never change. Your eyelids grow heavier. The sounds of the city dim, as though someone is turning down the volume on a great, clattering orchestra. The smells, too, soften, less coal, less sweat, more of that faint sweetness of night air after rain. You're almost ready to sleep now, almost ready to let the past tuck itself in. So take one last deep breath in, hold it gently, and let it go. The gowns rustle into silence. The perfumes fade, the myths dissolve. The whispered intimacies curl into dreams. And you, yes, you slip softly into rest. Because history, like sleep, is never entirely clean, never entirely neat. It's messy, human, scented with truth, and it waits for you again tomorrow. End of script. Sweet dreams.